My true north is not a crypto business. This is something that I believe in and we've developed with a lot of passion and attention to detail. But the awakening wasn't the crypto business. The awakening was that I had reached this high-level position as a branch manager at a bank. I was a pillar of the community. I, got to help and guide people through their finances. I made a decent paycheck doing it. And I was important in that position. And it wasn't enough. And it wasn't even that it wasn't enough. It wasn't even on the radar of whether or not it was enough. That in and of itself made me start going, okay, then what will be?
This is Andrew Petty is Dying, where we tap into the power of our mortality to become the people we were made to be and live the lives we were made to live. I'm your host, Andrew Petty, and I'm dying. I hate to say it, but so are you. What do you want? It's a simple enough question at face value, but it can be far from easy to answer. Many of us have never truly tried to answer it. Many of us have never been aware that it was important to do so. And many of us are a lot better at knowing what we don't want. Failing to answer this question can lead to surprisingly harmful consequences, but answering it can put us on a path to unprecedented purpose and fulfillment. Don't just take my word for it, though. In this episode, my guest, Chris Slota, gives us unfiltered access to the remarkable personal transformation he's experienced over the past couple of years, a transformation he owes in large part to his determination to begin figuring out what he wants in life. Listening back to our conversation, I was amazed to hear how many other timeless principles for living a life of purpose and fulfillment are embedded in Chris's story, too. This episode is a veritable cornucopia of practical wisdom for all of us. I met Chris and his wife Veronica at a dinner party almost 3 years ago. Not long after that, Chris became a member of one of my graveyard groups. Chris shares more about that whole progression and its significance in the conversation that you're about to hear. Chris hails originally from Ohio, but he's called our little mountain town of Steamboat Springs home since 2008. And like most of us here in Steamboat, he's never looked back. Without further ado, here's Chris's story in his own words. Paint a picture of Chris Slota 2 years ago.
Well, you and I were working together weekly on the graveyard group. And a big reason that I joined the graveyard group was a general dissatisfaction with where I was at in life. I had worked my way up a corporate ladder in the resort industry at one point in my life, but had the opportunity to go into the banking industry. And when I got that branch manager job, I was so excited. I thought I had reached the top. And 2 years ago, I had been the branch manager there for 6 years. And at that point, I was pretty beat down. Corporate job, lots of pressure, a fairly difficult time to drive new sales during a global pandemic, dealing with staff having to go out and we'd be shut down for 2 weeks, 10 days or whatever it was back then. And it was a high stress environment. And, we had talked a lot in the graveyard group about how to get out of that cycle and using your mortality as a focal point to be able to view what you want your life to be. And 2 years ago, I knew that I didn't want to be a banker anymore, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. And it was a struggle to try and figure that out. My whole life, I've been really good at knowing what I don't want. I knew growing up in Ohio, I didn't want to stay there. I went to college to be a high school English teacher. I knew after a period of time I didn't want to do that. But I was never very skilled at figuring out what I did want to do. And so 2 years ago, I felt like I was on the verge of something great, but I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know where I wanted to go with it. And so it was really a challenging time in my life because I knew I was ready to move on, but I had no prospects other than potentially looking at other jobs locally or something like that, something, again, that I felt would have been unfulfilling, just like the bank job.
And can you break down briefly, like when you say it was a challenging time in your life, what was the emotional experience? What was the physical experience? What was the relational experience? Paint that picture, challenging.
Yeah, honestly, if you took the pandemic completely away and I didn't have to deal with that at all at work, I still would have been pretty unhappy. I'm naturally a problem solver. I'm naturally a helpful person. And so working as a banker was gratifying in that regard. And I really enjoyed that. I like doing sales. And so that was decent parts to it. But dealing with decisions that people make for you with no thought on how that's going to affect you or your clients became really challenging. And then,
meaning the corporate higher up.
Yeah. And then you couple that with the fact that we had a pandemic that closed the bank down for periods of time or shut the doors so we didn't have any personal interaction. Everybody's got masks on, so you take the natural stress of a corporate job and then you compound that with a global pandemic. And it was, it was a high stress environment generally every day.
And what was your experience of life more holistically at that point, not just your time on the clock? How was that impacting your experience of relationships and recreation?
I was a grumpy ass, I'm pretty sure. I mean, I would have to maybe go back and talk to a few people, but I'm pretty sure I was a grumpy ass. Veronica and I had been talking about moving and leaving Steamboat. Part of that was if I'm going to go find a new job, then maybe we look at some place that's a little bit more cost effective, try a new adventure. We're both adventurous people, so maybe we just check out somewhere new and explore a new part of the country. And so, there was a sense of detachment for sure. Luckily, something I've been able to get back, recognizing that I was doing it. But
detachment from specifically?
I would say a lot of my local relationships, friendships, professionally, in general, I had one foot out the door.
Contrast that with Chris Slota today. Paint that picture. 2 years and change.
Chris runs his own business. I'm working basically 3 jobs. My full-time job is my business, and then I have a couple of side hustles to sustain us. I've probably never been more poor in my adult life. I wake up every day smiling. I think Veronica and I still, truly, probably not the first of the month, but every other day. So Veronica and I, we're still talking about moving, but it doesn't have that sense of urgency to it. It's more of a natural evolution rather than get me the hell out of here. And so, today, I feel confident in what I'm building. I really enjoy this business that I'm building. And I really enjoy the potential that we have. I've made some great relationships through this. And I made a commitment that, you're not gone yet. And so make sure you enjoy it while you're here, and make sure part of what I enjoy about Steamboat is the people, and make sure you enjoy those people while you still can.
So you've never been poor in your adult life, and yet you're waking up with a smile on your face.
Yeah.
What's that about?
I believe in what I'm doing, and I still think I'm solving puzzles, and I still think I'm helping people. And so I'm still doing what I'm naturally designed to do. But I get to do it in a way that's for me, and I get to make the decisions that I think are going to positively impact me and positively impact my clients. Working with a business partner who's a close friend of mine and having that type of relationship and conversation so that we can build something together is really gratifying. And ultimately, instead of, kind of playing defense all the time, which is how I felt at the bank, I feel like I'm finally getting to play some offense and really start building something and trailblazing something, which has been very exciting.
What changed for you in that 2-year period where you said earlier on you had been clear on you were pretty decent at knowing what you didn't want, and it's not as if that hadn't served you well, because you did leave Ohio, you did come to a place that you enjoyed, Steamboat. You did find some corporate work that for a period was meeting some particular needs, not just physical, but like vocational enjoyment kinds of needs for a time. And then that kind of ran out, and you found yourself a grumpy ass, as you described earlier. And of course, in the midst of a pandemic, so we all had a tendency to be grumpy back then.
Well, thank you.
But what changed in that 2-year period to where you can say now you're on the offensive, not on the defensive? You're living more of the kind of life that you want to live, even though if you looked at your financial bottom line, like it's tougher maybe than ever you've experienced it before, but you're waking up with a smile. What changed to allow that?
Well, there's a couple of big mentality shifts that it took. One of the first real light bulb moments for me in the graveyard group was, I think I spent probably the first 20 minutes of my hot seat complaining about my circumstances. And everybody was so nice and asking me good questions and very supportive questions and all that. And Mr. Andrew Petty looked at me and was like, you sound a lot like a victim. You sound a lot like you're not in control of your own life, but you are in control of your own life. And that mentality is something that needs to change. And I was like, screw this guy. Like, I've been coming here for a year. You don't know me. And that was a good light bulb moment for me, because it's something that I definitely didn't recognize in myself. And, life's hard. It's easy to complain. It is. And it's easy to feel victimized. There are times where we are victims, for sure. But that mentality doesn't help anybody, and it's not going to help you overcome anything. If you want to wallow in sorrow, you are welcome to do so. It's a free country. But you're probably not going to get anywhere if you do it. And so that was a really important moment for me. And then, we went through, I was talking about one of those hot seats where I wanted to move and I wanted to get a new job. And I had easy follow-up questions. Where do you want to move? I don't know. What jobs do you want to move on to? I don't know. And I found myself, and I recognized the fact that I was full of what I don't want, and we have all had managers in the past that teach us what not to do, right? It's an easy way to learn. It's an easy way to move forward with things, but it's hard to walk a path of places you don't want to go.
Right.
And so, what was important for me was being able to recognize that I had that mentality and change that mentality and start looking at where I do want to go and what I do want to do. And by doing that, I've actually started to do those things.
By the way, it takes one to know one. It was, the victim bit was something that transactional analysis and a specific application of that called the drama triangle that comes out of psychology had taught me probably beginning 4 or 5 years ago when I first learned that concept. It asks you to identify yourself within this drama triangle. Are you victim, persecutor, or rescuer? And as part of just my course of study, I was kind of interested in that. And then when I kind of realized that pure victim fit me best. In other words, not sure how to make my way in the world, can't always understand myself, feel like I need other people to show me the way, those kinds of things. When I realized that was my modality, that was my default state, I was like, whoa, we got to change that. Because like you said, very well, you said it's hard to walk a path toward what you don't want. It doesn't get you anywhere. Anyway, it takes one to know one. Like, part of the reason why, the way you were presenting yourself was evident to me is because I've lived that and have worked really hard to get out of that state. And it's a miserable way to be, but it can be a convenient way to be, because there are always people who will commiserate with you about the state of your life or the state of the world or how your boss is being a jerk. But I think we know deep down when we're in that we're making ourselves more miserable. We're not happy with ourselves when we're in that state. What allowed you to swallow that medicine and begin to do something different? Because it is stiff medicine. That's tough medicine to take.
Honestly, deep down, I knew that the change was necessary, and figuring out a direction to be able to take responsibility for myself. I was so used to taking responsibility for everybody else and everybody else's issues that I tended not to focus on those for myself. And just taking that ownership and being like, you are the catalyst for change in your life. So now I'm building the tools to be able to do that. Why not use them?
Well done, because not everyone who is able to acknowledge that there's some victim-y stuff going on are willing to begin to make that shift, because it requires a lot of work.
Well, and it completely changed how I deal with relationships and how I recognize the energy of those around me and who I surround myself with. And it's absolutely strengthened my relationship with my wife, and helped change her mentality a bit, because she not only sees some of the fruits of this as far as me starting a business and so on, but also she's starting to recognize the complete attitude shift that I've had and how much it's changed how we interact and how much more empathetic I am with her and so on. And so, even she's started to take on some of those traits as well. And it's been really interesting to see how it affects those around me positively. And so rather than me complaining about things I can't control, I'm trying to build people up around me and be a positive influence in that. And that is rewarding. And if nothing else, encourages you to keep doing it.
That's how we change the world. We change ourselves. Then we change our world, in your case, including Veronica. And then that begins to change the world. It's no small thing. And it's not as if you set out to change Veronica. You just set out to try and do something a little bit different, more enjoyable with your life, had some realizations along the way. But, when one partner in a relationship begins to make those kinds of changes, the other can't but have to deal with that somehow.
Right.
And decide what that means for them. And all of us have some dysfunction in our relationships. And whenever one of us decides to get a little bit more functional, it forces change in the whole relationship. There's no way to get around that.
Yeah, also going, hey, I'm not going to make a good income probably for 2 years. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Without asking permission, And she bought in immediately, luckily, because that could have gone a completely different way. And I would have understood if it had. But yeah, I mean, it's completely changed our dynamic.
That's so cool. You realized that you were clear on what you didn't want, but you lacked the capacity to know clearly what you did want. Mm-hmm. So it's one thing to have that insight, but that doesn't mean that you yet know how to figure out what you want. How did you go about doing that?
So my business partner's name is Chris as well. So a couple of Chris's. And the pandemic hit, and Chris worked in resort management, and he got furloughed. And so I hired him over at the bank because I had an opening. I had somebody that had left, and hired him over at the bank. And Chris bugged me pretty much every single day about cryptocurrency and why, as a banker, was I not invested, and how could I not be paying attention to these things? So he's a smart guy, and I trust him. And so I started listening to him. He started showing me some things, and I said, look, the only way I'm going to invest in these things is if you show me what I need to do, what apps I need to download, what currencies are worth buying, and why. Walk me through this and help me understand it so that I can actually feel educated before I invest in this stuff. And he did. And he walked me through every bit of it, showed me how easy it was to transfer it, showed me how private everything was. And I'm sitting there going, man, I wonder how many people out there have this service in this industry. And so I started doing some research and recognized that nobody, literally nobody, will act as a personal fiduciary and financial advisor for cryptocurrency. And so we started talking about potentially building a business in January of last year, and initiated the business in February, and 2 weeks later I left the bank and we started this business. I had a couple of financial things that I felt like the universe was egging me on and telling me to go. We had our tax return. I had a stimulus check coming. I had a handful of things that were going to keep me afloat for a while. And so it felt like the natural move to do it. And so, yeah, we launched C4 Crypto Advisors in February of last year. Took our first client at the end of March and have just been growing ever since.
You had kind of the best scenario for making change, which is a push from behind and a pull from the front. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we have the push from behind, something we don't want. And let's just use lowercase p pain. Like there's a low level grade of pain associated with our current reality. We don't want that. And we try to move elsewhere. We end up making a lateral move that might temporarily be better because it's new, but it's lateral in that nothing substantially has changed within us or in the environment we've placed ourselves in. And so we just create a new iteration of the same pattern. And then 2-3 years later, we wake up and we go, I hate this. What happened? How come it didn't work out? Mm-hmm. But when we have the push from the rear and the pull from the front, then it, by definition, can't be really a lateral move. We're moving towards something different and new. So it's an upward move of some degree, which is awesome. And what sticks out to me, too, from what you're sharing is just what many of us might call serendipity, as in, gosh, who could have seen that happening? But right. A colleague begins to get you interested in crypto. Your mind begins to spin because you're good at solving problems and seeing opportunities and unrealized opportunities. And boom, you leave the bank and you're off and running. And I think a lot of people call that pure serendipity, but I think there's nothing terribly serendipitous about that if we look at the ingredients of that. It was you in the context of friendship with some history and some trust, and those ingredients in a relationship are all you need for serendipities to emerge, for good things to happen. And I personally have begun to sort of operationalize that and just say, how can I get myself alongside interesting people doing cool things as often as possible? Mm-hmm. Because you never know what's going to come out of it, but it will be serendipitous when we look back on it. So you guys launched this business and boom, upward trajectory. All things are great. I mean, the money's rolling in. Tell us about that moving forward, because you've gotten clear on what you wanted.
Yeah.
Was it all roses?
Man, No, we planted roses, but it takes time to grow, right?
Yeah.
It was tough. Starting a business that doesn't exist anywhere else is very exciting, but it's challenging. I had to reach out to financial regulators and ask questions that they didn't know the answers to. I'm still waiting on a ruling from FinCEN as to whether or not I constitute a money service business. That was a year ago. My bank didn't know if they could bank us. In fact, my very first bank that we started a business account with kicked us out of the bank 3 weeks later because they go, oh, actually, it turns out we can't help this type of business. Okay, that's fine. So we moved on to the next bank, but that was just part of that growth curve. We didn't know how we wanted to charge people. We didn't know what services we wanted to offer. We didn't really understand what the need was. And so literally blazed a trail in this industry because we had no thing to base it off of other than maybe a traditional financial model, which we couldn't have the same products and services per se, but we could have the same general idea. It was a challenge. Our first clients were all close friends. And those close friends basically said, look, I believe in this, and I'm willing to give you a chance to help you figure it out. And basically, we piloted for the first 2 months. And we didn't even have real clients where, basically people that weren't close friends or family giving us a shot until June. And then, so from February to June, it was all a pilot program, basically. And then we rolled out our services in June. And from there, it has grown quite a bit. I mean, every time the market dips, so does interest wane. And that's been something that's interesting. But, whereas before that would sort of stymie us, now it allows us to focus on other items where we're starting a new business. Right now we brought on an attorney and we're doing a smart contract business and we're about to bid on a tax credit project. And so there's been some exciting opportunities that have come from it. And those are the roses, honestly. Like, I'm excited to be able to start cashing checks and so on and so forth. But until that time, recognizing the work and the opportunity and just having the opportunity to grow what you want and focus on what you want and taking customer feedback and actually being able to apply that directly to your business because it makes sense and because the customer's right. Or being able to take somebody who's really afraid of the market and explain it to them in a way that not only makes them want to invest with you, but where they genuinely understand this new technology. And so it's been gratifying, as somebody who wanted to be a teacher and a problem solver and a salesperson, I get to do all of those things.
You're a gifted teacher and a gifted problem solver, from my experience with you. And it's so cool when we look at one of the things I try to encourage my clients and anyone I have an opportunity to have a conversation like this with is to, especially when they're trying to evolve themselves professionally, like what do I do in the world, is not to think so much in terms of existing categories of work, like I'm going to be an X or a Y, a plumber or a whatever, but first to think about the ingredients in your work life that especially energize you. And you know a bunch of them. Being able to solve problems regularly, being able to help people regularly, being able to impart knowledge to people. Now, you could take that and put that into a bunch of different existing categories of work, but it just so happens that you found a new path of work for yourself that combine those ingredients, and I would wager give you a fair amount of satisfaction, even in the midst of the significant challenges of building your own business, trying to actually make some money, and doing that in an uncharted industry. Mm-hmm. Is that true for you?
All of what I'm doing right now feeds my energy, and we do a monthly crypto happy hour in town. And we have somewhere between, it's usually around a dozen people that show up for that. And, I work a full work day. I wake up in the morning. I do all the stuff I need to for my business. I go to one of my part-time jobs. So I've already worked 8-9 hours at that point. And then I have to go and sit down and talk to people for the next couple of hours. And it sounds exhausting, but honestly, those moments to just have a conversation, and our crypto happy hours aren't sales pitches, It's just to talk about the industry and allow people to have an avenue to talk about these things without kind of that negative, everybody fears the unknown. And so if you go and you talk to your friend about crypto and blockchain, there's a high likelihood that friend's like, I don't know.
Right.
So we give them a safe space to talk about these things, and to sit down for another couple of hours and do that after a full workday, fully re-energizes me. And it's really interesting to me, but it's also fun to watch people get excited about something that they were curious about, and watch people start to understand a little bit better how this can practically apply to their real world. I'm a very pragmatic person, and to look at these things as just an investment vehicle is not doing it justice. To look at these things and how they can help change the world is what I get really excited about. And so just sharing that with people and being able to educate and being able to hopefully make people a lot of money down the road is very exciting and brings my energy up a lot.
There's a qualitative difference to the stress that you're experiencing now compared to the stress you were experiencing in your former life 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
What is that difference?
I chose this stress.
Okay.
I chose this path, and I believe in it genuinely, and I'm very interested in it. And so, yeah, I'm stressed, but I actually have direction that I believe in and that I chose myself. Whereas before, I was just kind of dealing with the stress to get through to whatever I figured out next, right? And so it led to kind of a sense of hopelessness. You're just going through the motions to get through it until you figure it out, but not making any effort to figure it out for a time. And so, by doing the work and starting to figure out what I want and starting to figure out where I wanted to go with it, this is my stress. And I would say my biggest stress that I deal with right now that still feels negative at times is guilt. I feel guilty in my relationship with my wife at times that there are moments where I'm not earning anything at all, and she's got to carry us. Mm-hmm. And she's willing and has been very, very gracious in that. But, I've always kind of, at the very least, want to be an equal partner in our relationship. And so not bringing in an income for a period of time has definitely, I don't suffer with the guilt all the time. And there are many times where I'm able to say, look, like, this is temporary pain for lifelong pleasure. That's what I'm going for. And so I don't struggle with it all the time, but it is admittedly a challenge.
Mm-hmm. Temporary pain for lifelong pleasure. That's, making sacrifices today in the interest of creating an even better reality for yourself in the future.
Delayed gratification.
I'm just struck by everything you've said about how the stress is qualitatively different. But if I'm reading between the lines correctly, I don't think you would trade this for what you had in the past for anything.
No,
almost.
Thank you.
Which is, counterintuitive, is paradoxical in a sense. But Jordan Peterson talks a lot about this, and I've learned a lot from him about what creates meaning and satisfaction and positive emotion in life. And it's moving towards something that calls to you, that's important to you, that requires a lot of responsibility and hard work and effort. Mm-hmm. Often people discover when they undertake something like that, and then they achieve either completely or substantially the thing they set out for, that suddenly they have a dilemma like, oh, now what? Mm-hmm. Because the getting there was actually the best part, and you're in the heart of that part of the journey right now. Moving towards something that calls to you, but you're not yet where you'd like to be,
yeah.
And every day is a new adventure.
I've talked to a few people that have successfully launched businesses and are in the midst of great success. And they've told me, enjoy it right now, because right now is the fun stuff. Once you've made it, that's fun too, don't get me wrong. But they say, enjoy what's going on right now, because this is the most exciting part of it. And that was great advice, because there are times where you can kind of get lost in the mix and get lost in what you're doing. But I like to stop and smell the roses just in general in life. And so I've made sure to do that throughout this process, because even just seeing a year ago where we were at versus where we are now, and what our client base is now versus what it was in June, and just looking at the growth that we've made and the decisions that we've made, and it's exciting, because you have ownership of this, and you get to hear feedback from people and directly use it. I was one of those people as a kid, and I don't know how you were, but I asked why to everything. I needed to know why to everything. If you can't tell me...
I asked my mom what the dirt was doing one time.
Yeah, if you can't tell me why, then I probably won't do it. The what's not important to me, the why always was. And so, I have a why now. And I think that what we're doing is genuinely going to help people and change lives. And so, I know it's going to change mine at the very least. It already has. And so that's been the gratifying part of it.
Let's imagine, and God forbid, and I don't think this is going to happen at all, but imagine it just craps the bed. Like everything you're shooting for, just someday you're like, it's just not happening. Or something catastrophic comes along and knocks you off the rails. Has it been a loss or a gain?
I mean, it's definitely a gain. My true north is not a crypto business, right? This is something that I believe in and we've developed with a lot of passion and attention to detail. But the awakening wasn't the crypto business. The awakening was that I had reached this high-level position as a branch manager at a bank. I was a pillar of the community. I got to help and guide people through their finances. I made a decent paycheck doing it, and I was important in that position. And it wasn't enough. And it wasn't even that it wasn't enough. It wasn't even on the radar of whether or not it was enough. And so that in and of itself made me start going, okay, then what will be? And I think that was really the gain out of all of it is, starting to recognize that, the way that your parents have always done it may not be the way that you're going to do it. Or the way that you assessed risk in the past may not be the way you assess risk now. And starting to kind of open up and recognize who I am and who I wanted to be and what legacy I wanted to leave started to really change my mentality. And then from there, I was able to recognize the opportunity that we could fill a need within the crypto industry. That's where I had already opened my eyes, and then it allowed me to see. That's what it was.
Beautifully said. That's perfect. I love that. Yeah. The same crypto opportunity could have presented itself to you earlier, but had you had the same lens that you've been using to view the world, it wouldn't have appeared as it did to you.
Yeah. Hopefully somebody starts that business.
Right. Exactly.
That would be very smart.
I'll help you with your financing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Really well said. I had never quite seen it that way. Those things are the prerequisite is to open your eyes to a new way of looking at the world. And that allows you then to see new options and opportunities. Something else that strikes me in your story is that you didn't know all of the hows, you knew the what. You had a clear why, and then that allowed you to see a what in front of you. But you didn't have all the hows, but you didn't demand that you knew all of the hows. You just started moving with the what. And along the way, you've had to solve a lot of problems. And there were probably a lot of problems that you didn't even know would need to be solved that you came upon. And I just want to highlight that for the listener, because if you want to move forward in your life and there's something that's calling to you, don't get stuck on the how. Just be clear on the what and begin to move. And as you move, the questions that need answering and the problems that need solving present themselves. Until that time, you really don't know.
Chris and I talk a lot about don't sacrifice good for perfect. Because if we did, I'd still be doing something different. We've had to invent everything that we do. Not that we've created the software or anything like that, but the way that we handle our business is unique in the fact that nobody else does it and nobody else does it the way we do. But yeah, I mean, I still don't have insurance because there was one company that I could find that did insurance for the blockchain business, and they were out of Chicago and they stopped doing it because the risk was too high. I can't find somebody to custody my funds that'll allow people to log in and see it themselves. That's something that doesn't exist in my industry yet, where that's every single institution in the traditional finance industry has that access, right? And so there's challenges that we're still overcoming on a daily basis. But what's exciting about that is that I like the unknown. I don't fear the unknown. And I'm the type of person, like I'm learning how to ski. I've lived in Steamboat for 14 years and I'm learning how to ski because I just want to challenge myself and learn how to do that. And so this is just a further instance of who I naturally am, which is, just because you don't know how to do it now doesn't mean that you won't know soon. And so go learn how to do it or go invent how to do it and you'll figure that out as you go. But don't not do it just because it's not perfect. And so it's been really gratifying.
What do you hope we learn from your experience? If there's a nugget or two.
Learn who you are first is a good step. Who you are and maybe who you aren't too. And once you start putting in the work to figure out what you naturally do well, what your skills are, how your brain functions, what your attitude is towards the world, and start to figure out those things and do that work, it starts to open up so many other avenues of growth. And that happened for me pretty quickly. And so once you put that work in, you start to identify what you want to do with it. And that's where I started recognizing that I had a victim mentality. That's where I started recognizing that I was I've always been focused on what I don't want. Always. I knew I didn't want to live in Ohio, but I didn't know where I wanted to go. Do I want to go to the coast? Do I want to go to the mountains? It took that work for me to start recognizing what path I wanted to walk. And so I would just encourage people to take a look at yourself. Even if it's not the picture that you hoped for, even if it's not a rosy picture, that's good that you can recognize that. And then just start making an understanding of where you want to go with that so that you can start making those steps. And so, I think that not settling, not letting yourself settle into patterns that aren't self-serving, that are energy draining instead of energy building, has been a major change in my life.
The kind of human we are is largely discoverable and knowable.
Yeah.
And especially when we commit to that work, it's incrementally knowable over time, the more that we take action on our whatever insight we have in the moment. But I think for a lot of reasons, many of us, well into adulthood, fail to actually take some time to understand the kind of human we are and what we're made to do in the world. Mm-hmm. How did you go about doing that? Like, what actually yielded insight for you that was actionable?
Well, the first step I took was when we met. Andrew and I met at a dinner at a friend's house, and I could tell you were genuinely interested and asked me a ton of great questions about who I was and what I wanted. And then, weeks later, I got invited to join your graveyard group. And I was like, it was a no-brainer for me because I had pain points. I had a lack of fulfillment. And I had somebody who was genuinely interested and engaged, who asked great questions and seemed like they wanted to help me make positive change, offering to do so. So I joined the graveyard group and did that for... How long was it? The pandemic kind of
2 years and change. Yeah,
it
was a wonky 2
almost
years,
3 years,
yeah,
I think, right? And so the graveyard group was a great first step because you look at through the lens of mortality, like we're doing on this podcast, and you start recognizing that if you were going to pass, if you knew you were going to pass within a certain period of time, how would that change your behavior? How would that change who you are even as a person? And looking at that, I looked at it probably less from a legacy perspective at my age. And I looked at it more of, it's time to wake up and really start making the change that you want. You just didn't know how to do it. And so a lot of my hot seats when I was up walking through what I needed, a lot of those were focused more on figuring out what I want and where I wanted to go and talking about certain pain points, but through the lens of what am I going to do to overcome that and move forward from it. And so I think that doing the graveyard group was huge. Doing the personality test and the skills test. That skills test seems like it was a lot like a Wonderlic test. And I was sweating at the end of that. It was nerve-wracking.
You're talking specifically about Myers-Briggs and the Highlands ability battery.
The ability battery. And I was battered after that.
Yeah,
that
right.
battery.
Highlands assault and battery. Yeah.
But it was good for me because it made me start thinking about myself. Even if, regardless of the results, it made me start to really break through my barriers that I had created around myself. And I think it was self-preservation, protection, some defensiveness from it. And rather than have and hold on to those that aren't serving me, it allowed me to break down those barriers and start moving past those, start recognizing who I am, give myself a little credit and give myself a little grace. From there, I was able to start identifying not only I knew what I wanted to do as far as a business, but give me the confidence to start building it in the way that I wanted to. It made me a better partner to my business partner, Chris, because it opened me up to his input and it opened me up to what he wanted to do with it. And, as a manager for pretty much my whole professional career, at first I didn't want to manage Chris and the business. I just wanted to manage myself and what I needed to do. And what I recognized through that process is that I have a natural skill to do these things, manage this process and take responsibility for myself and others. And so why would I deny that and not do that in this? And so, it really helped solidify some of the things that I thought I knew about myself, but really just give me the confidence to be that person.
There are many of you listening who will relate, not in the particulars, but in the generalities of what Chris is saying about not being clear on what you don't want, but not being clear on what you do want. Maybe you're even aware that you're lacking a lot of understanding about the kind of human you are. And Chris's story is just a great example of how we can discover who we are, what we're made to do, and you can begin to do that. And the journey that you set out on from that point forward becomes exciting, challenging, daunting, rewarding, all of the above, but substantially different and better in the most important ways than the previous chapter. There's so many reasons why we stay stuck in those old chapters. I mean, our family of origin, the worldview we've evolved and created because of our family of origin and our early experiences in life. And there's just so much in what you're saying that reveals that you shed a lot of old skin. I remember when we pretty soon, I don't know when it was, a couple of years after we moved to Steamboat, I was riding with my wife somewhere, and for some reason, this happens to me every once in a while. It's the way my brain and heart work. But it was a major transition for us to come out here, not just geographically, but personally and professionally. And a lot of us in Steamboat have stories like that. But an image just came to mind of what that represented very well how I felt in that moment, because it was a really intense period of metamorphosis for me, for my wife, for us as partners, for my family. And I told her, it feels like a snake shedding its skin. It's not quite the peaceful experience of the larva going into the cocoon and emerging a butterfly. I mean, there's an actual death that occurs there, which is, significant metaphorically.
Yeah, I don't think that's a peaceful process.
But the snake is active in the process. So, if the snake wants to get out of that skin and become the snake it can be, it has to crawl over rough ground for days, I think. I'm not a biologist or zoologist, but, from what little I know, it's a lengthy, somewhat painful process that the snake has to undertake on its own if it wants to emerge. And that's very much how I felt during that period of time. And your story reminds me a lot of that too. You've had to really do this work to scrape off this old skin so that more of the real Chris can become available to the world. And certainly the Chris I see before me now is a much, in my opinion, and according to the way you describe it, a much fairer representation of who Chris really is.
Yeah, and we'll save that snake metaphor only for that context. As a financial advisor, I bristle a bit at being called a snake, but that's okay.
Right. Purely metaphorical. And who you're capable of becoming is yet to be known. But you've set yourself on a path of discovery that will lead you to the knowledge of who you can actually become.
Yeah, and I think who I become is going to change over time. A snake doesn't just shed its skin once and it's done.
Right. Good point.
And so I think that this mindset and these tools that I've been working on are going to enable me to change, adapt, grow, and stay feeding the energy that I need forever. And that's the cool part, is like you mentioned earlier, if this business fails, I don't know what I would do next, but I know how I would do it. And I think that's the really cool part is, if you find an opportunity and a light bulb goes on what you want to do, then that's fantastic. But even if you don't, the work is still worth it.
You've not started a business merely, you've grown as a person. And that growth can be applied to anything that you choose to apply yourself. It's transferable across the board. So I think you've fundamentally fortified and strengthened your position in the world well beyond where you were before, even though when you look at your bank account, it's not where you'd like it to be yet. But you're still fundamentally stronger and better positioned in the world, I think, than the Chris we knew 2 years ago was.
Yeah, and it's funny. I went and played basketball with some friends the other day, and I haven't played for probably a year with some of those guys. And immediately when I walked in the gym, people were like, wow, you look really relaxed. And people, even people that I'm not particularly close with, people I see every once in a while, can already see like a different demeanor and a different way that I carry myself. And, I believe in energies and I believe in that people carry that energy, high vibration, low vibration, stuff like that. And I think that I can feel it. I perceive those things. And it's funny for me to walk into a room and people immediately perceive that my energy is different and my attitude is different. That was an interesting kind of small thing, but still very gratifying just for people to recognize the work that I've been doing, even if they don't know all that context and they don't know what work I have actually gone through and what the change is. They see it regardless, and that's pretty cool.
And they want it, and they might not be willing to do what it's taken for you to get it. That's the interesting part. It's been no joke, getting to where you are today.
Sure.
Chris, how can people connect with you if they're interested in learning more about your story and the process you've gone through and or your business?
People are welcome to reach out to me. My email. Are you going to post my email?
I'll post it in the show notes. Go ahead and just share the info.
Sure. It's my email is info at C4 Crypto Advisors. Advisors is SERS.com. I also have a website, C4CryptoAdvisors.com. And then we're on Twitter and Instagram as well. So if you look up C4 Crypto, we're on there. And so those are probably the most easy and direct ways to reach out to me. And then we host a crypto happy hour every third Wednesday of the month. And so this month it's going to be at Vaqueros. And so if anybody wants to come and join us there, again, it's not a sales pitch for the business. It's mostly just to get people comfortable and put like-minded people in a room together. Because that's, I mean, you know, through your experience, it's a really fun thing to do. And you get to see some really gratifying results out of that. And so people are welcome to come to the crypto happy hours we do every month.
Awesome. Chris, thanks for the gift of your story and your time today.
Yeah, thanks
it's
for
gonna
having me.
help a lot of people as they examine their own lives. And all of you listening out there, remember, you are going to die, but you're not dead yet. So get after it. An overarching theme in Chris's story is personal responsibility. Chris assumed more complete responsibility for himself by securing resources to help him find an even better way forward when he realized that his current situation wasn't satisfactory. In Chris's case, the Graveyard Group became a key ingredient in his recipe for transformation. That one simple step, proactively investing in himself with a small group of other men, paved the way for all that was to come. It created the fertile soil out of which pivotal insights would emerge, especially his awareness that he was much better at knowing what he didn't want than what he did want. Those insights led to concrete action in the real world, and those actions created transformation. Insight plus action equals transformation. Pause for a moment and ask yourself, where in my life am I more of a passive bystander than an active participant? Where am I failing to take complete responsibility for myself? Whatever you come up with, are you willing to take a page out of Chris's playbook and do something about it? Tomorrow never comes, folks. There's only today. What are you waiting for? To learn more about the Graveyard Group, visit digdeepwinbig.com/The Graveyard Group. Message me on Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn at Andrew Petty Coach, or email me at andrew@digdeepwinbig.com. I'm so glad you tuned in today. Don't forget to follow this show, and I'll see you next time on Andrew Petty is Dying.